the empire stable by dropping taxes and cutting spending, but he was killed after only 86 days. Didius Julianus won the empire in an auction run by the Praetorian Guards. He only ruled for 2 months before Severus took over. Wassianus Julianus killed Marcia in the year 193 AD. King Gustav III of Sweden. Swedish King Gustav III was killed at a masked ball at the Royal Opera House in Stockholm on March 16, 1792. A group of unhappy nobles planned to kill him because they didn't like Gustav's rule or his recent changes, which gave the king more power while taking away the nobility's rights. Setting the date for the masked ball was part of the carefully planned murder. In black robes and white masks, Ankarström and his fellow terrorists went into the opera house on the day of the attack. Gustav III went to the ball with his friend Count Hans Henrik von Essen. He wore a mask and a cape from Venice. The rebels were set up to catch the king in the act. The shot hit Gustav in the back while he was talking to Captain Karl Frederick Pollitt. Gustav was hit at an angle by the bullet, which hurt his hip and back. Even though Gustav was badly hurt, he did not fall down right away. When Ankarström saw that the king was still moving, he became scared, dropped his weapons, and yelled, "Fire!" before running into the crowd. Von Essen and others quickly came to help the king and took him to a private room where Gustav could complain of being weak and have his clothes put out of the fire. King Gustav III escaped the attack at first, but he later died of sepsis from an infection and a wound. He was 46 years old when he died on March 29, 1792. His funeral, which took place at Riddarholmen Church on May 14, 1792, had beautiful decorations and a moving musical honor by Joseph Martin Krauss. Ankarström was caught. He then admitted to killing Gustav, and was then put to death by being beheaded and cut into 4 pieces. King Henry VI of England. When King Henry VI died in 1471, it was the end of a rough rule that began during the Wars of the Roses. The Lancasters lost the Battle of Barnet on April 14, 1471, and Henry VI was sent to the Tower of London to be locked up. People have said that he was kept in the Wakefield Tower, but the official guidebook says that he was probably kept in the Lanthorn Tower, which was where the royal family lived. Thomas Neville, Viscount Fauconberg, tried to save Henry VI from the tower in the middle of May 1471, but failed. Because of what Fauconberg did, Edward IV may have realized how dangerous it was to keep Henry living. Edward IV went back to London on May 21, 1471, with his brother Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who would later become Richard III. He was 49 years old when he died that same night. The official account from the Yorkists said that Henry VI died of melancholy after losing people close to him. A lot of people think that Edward IV ordered his death, though. Tradition says that Henry VI died while he was praying in a small room in the tower. Some people think that Richard, Duke of Gloucester, had something to do with the killings. Henry VI's body was put on show in London the next day in an open casket to prove that he had died. The body was then taken to Blackfriars Monastery for the funeral. After the service, it was taken up the Thames by barge to Chertsey Abbey to be buried. King Richard III ordered Henry's body to be dug up and moved to St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle in 1484. In 1910, Henry's body was studied, and it was found that his head was broken, and some of his hair was matted with something that looked like blood. This makes it seem like he may have died violently, but the exact cause is still unknown. King Philip II of Spain. In the terrible year 1598, King Philip II of Spain passed away after being poisoned. Even though he didn't die right away, it was a long, painful process that showed how far political opponents would go to win. Concerns about Philip's heir were a big part of his rule. It's not clear how his first son, Don Carlos, died, and his heir, Philip III, was thought to be weak, which made people question the future of the Spanish dynasty. Philip was very religious and avoided enjoying the joys of this world. which made him fixate on work and not trust the people around him. He was notorious for being cruel, and when people fought against his rule, he would often punish whole areas as well as individuals. During his rule, Philip had a lot of problems. The Dutch were rising up against him, and even though a lot of people died, he lost control of the provinces. Spain was falling apart, and there were also uprisings and an economic crisis in the country. It was a big loss when the English beat the Spanish Armada in 1588. Philip took the loss in stride, saying, "I sent my fleet against men, not against the wind and the waves." Philip's health got worse and worse in his last years. The gout and malaria had made him very sick and uncomfortable. He was stuck in a special chair for the last 3 years of his life, which made it almost impossible for him to move. Philip II died at the age of 71 in the Escorial and was buried in the pantheon of Spanish kings. The drug that killed him caused him a lot of pain for a long time, which shows how dangerous things were in his time. King Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile. In 1109, King Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile died in a terrible accident that was caused by a cruel act of betrayal. Alfonso went through a slow and painful death after his own nobles poisoned him. He came to Toledo to protect the city from an Almoravid attack that was about to happen. His death was caused by a cruel plot, and he was in a lot of pain in his last moments. Alfonso wanted his body to be taken to the monastery of San Benito in Sahagún after he died as planned. At first, he was buried in a stone tomb that was set up at the base of the church. Later, during the rule of Sancho IV, this tomb was moved to a more visible spot in the church's transept because Sancho IV thought Alfonso shouldn't be buried at the base of the temple. A fire at the royal monastery of San Benito in 1810 destroyed the tomb where Alfonso's body was buried. In the abbey room until 1821, his body and the bodies of his wives were kept together. When the monks were kicked out, the bodies were put in a box and moved to a different place in 1835. The remains were given to a cousin when the monastery closed in 1835 and stayed hidden until 1902, when Professor Rodrigo Fernandez Núñez found them again. Alfonso's body is now kept in the monastery of the Benedictine women of Sahagún. They are kept in a smooth stone ark with a modern marble lid. The bodies of several of his wives are buried nearby in a separate tomb. King Louis XVII of France. Louis XVII's death in 1795 was a sad and violent end that was marked by neglect and abuse. He was the second son of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. His birth name was Louis Charles de France. He spent his early years at the fancy palace of Versailles, but when the French Revolution started, things went badly for him. After the attack on the Tuileries Palace in August 1792, Louis Charles was sent to the Temple jail. On January 21, 1793, his father was put to death. The young prince was given the name Louis XVII, but that didn't protect him from the harsh facts of France during the Revolution. Marie Antoinette, Louis Charles's mother, was taken away to be put to death, and Antoine Simon, a shoemaker and rebel, took care of him. Simon was in charge of convincing Louis Charles to give up being a king. He made the young prince speak against his mother at her trial, which led to her death. This trick was part of a bigger plan to get rid of all traces of the old government. Louis XVII was locked up in horrible conditions when he was only 8 years old. The young prince got very sick very quickly because the jail was dirty. He passed away in 1795 from tuberculosis. The pain he was in jail was very different from the wealth he had known before. After he died, Dr. Philippe Jean Pelletan kept his heart safe. In 1975, it was moved to the royal crypt at Saint-Denis. Modern studies have proven that the boy who died in the Temple prison was, in fact, Marie Antoinette's son. This puts an end to any rumors of a body double and brings attention to the sad end of a young life destroyed by political unrest. King Charles IX of France. King Charles IX of France passed away on May 30th, 1574. He was only 23 years old. He probably died of cancer, but there are still a lot of scary stories about how he died. King Henry II had 3 sons. Charles was the third. Charles became king when he was only 10 years old after his father died in 1559, and his bigger brother Francis died the next year. Catherine de' Medici, his mother, was the real power behind the throne. She used her position to support Catholics and put down Protestant Huguenots. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572 was one of the worst times in Charles's rule. Catherine planned this horrible event, during which thousands of Huguenots were killed over several days. Charles felt very bad about killing so many people. He had visions and fears that followed him around. For example, he thought that the crows on the roof of the Louvre were the dying Huguenots' cries. Several stories make it sound like Charles's death wasn't just from being sick. One story says that a book killed him. Catherine de' Medici was said to have planned to give Henry of Navarre, Charles's Protestant son-in-law, a book that had poison sprinkled all over it. It is said that Charles touched the book and got arsenic on his lips, which caused him to die painfully. But this story is not likely because arsenic wouldn't work that fast. There is also a scary and unlikely story that Charles died of fear after a black magic rite. According to this story, Catherine killed a kid as part of a dark ritual to call on the devil and save Charles. People said the claimed ritual was terrifying, and Charles is said to have died of fear. In fact, Charles's last years were ruined by poor health and a strong sense of guilt over the massacre. His mother kept running France's government until Henry, Charles's younger brother, became king, King Louis XVI of France. On January 21st, 1793, King Louis XVI of France died in a terrible way. During the French Revolution, he was put to death by guillotine as a show of punishment. The king's death was both a dramatic show and a brutally efficient operation, which shows how violent the revolt was. Louis tried to back reforms at first, but his indecision and unwillingness to fully accept change made things worse. By October 1789, a crowd had moved the royal family from Versailles to Paris. Louis tried to get away in June 1991, but was caught in Varennes and sent back to Paris. In 1792, the rebels put him on trial, got rid of the king, and made France a republic. Louis was taken from the Temple jail to the Place de la Révolution on the morning of January 21. When the trip began around 8 in the morning, Louis was in a carriage with soldiers and government leaders on either side. A lot of people were watching over the area, and cannons were set up to keep the crowd in check. The guillotine was placed in a visible place, and there were a lot of people watching. Louis got to the scaffold at 10 in the morning. He was wearing stockings, a white shirt, and black silk pants. He was going to talk to the crowd. However, the crowd yelled, telling him to be quiet. They yelled to cut him off. Louis said a few words in which he asked for forgiveness and said he was innocent. The killer then quickly cut off his head with the guillotine. There were cheers and chants from the crowd, who waved hats and yelled slogans. After he was put to death, Louis's body was placed in a grave close to where he was put to death. The grave was filled with quicklime to help the body break down faster. After that, his body was moved more than once. The dramatic hanging of Louis XVI showed how harsh the revolution was and marked the end of France's old government. Thank you for watching the video. Stay tuned for more exciting ones.